Hello and welcome to the Halcyon review. I'm your host, lazily. On this episode I'm going to be taking a look at the game series that picked up where the gameplay of the Hulk game left off, in addition to where the musical score of the television series Heroes left off as well. The Prototype series. Released in 2009 and 2012 respectively, Prototypes 1 and 2 were games that decided to give you the combined powers of the Hulk, Superman, Mystique, Spawn and God himself, and let you run riot in the island of Manhattan during what appears to be a zombie apocalypse. And it's up to each protagonist respectively, Alex Mercer and James Heller, to find out what's happened. Who am I? Who did this to me? I'm gonna get revenge. Indeed, what their role in events to come are. And given the game was styled and animated like an R-rated superhero flick, which is kind of preordained the Deadpool and the Logan films that came after, this game series decided to take a tangent while also retaining some aspects of the comic book lore by having its own comic book prequel series. And this is a game series that kind of took some reviewers by surprise, given that they stated that it was an original concept, which I take issue with given the aforementioned Hulk series and its obvious comparisons to the PlayStation 3's infamous series. But despite that, when I first saw the CGI promo of the first game, I was pumped, I was hyped. I really wanted to buy that game. And then after my first experience, left it for a little bit, and then you saw the promo for the second game, and you've got to be honest, anything that uses Johnny Cash's Hurt to promote something automatically gives it an emotion level that's going to sit deep with you. And add into this, both games painted you as a parkour master with the abilities of a symbiote maxed out to the highest possible proportion, letting you run riot on a city where you can destroy zombie hordes at your leisure. How could you not be hyped for that? And yet, on both occasions I left both games feeling ultimately short-changed. Which, considering all I've just said, makes no sense. So how is this possible? Well, let's take a look as we review on this episode of Halcyon Review, the Prototype series. So let's kick things off with the gameplay that the Prototype series offers to its players, e.g. God Mode. The gameplay itself centers around the protagonist traversing the island of Manhattan and in the process, completing missions that progress the story and in addition enhance and improve their abilities. These abilities stem from a virus that is plaguing the island, and while in most cases turns people into mindless zombies or worse, in the case of Mercer and Heller, imbue them with the ability to control every molecule in their body, which in turn grants them tremendous powers. These include, but are not limited to, super strength, nigh invulnerability, the ability to transform appendages and their body as a whole to form either offensive weapons such as claws, blades and tendrils, but also allows them the ability to assume the identity and memories of the people that they quote-unquote consume, which is often a very gruesome and horrific process for both the protagonist and the victim. You can freely use these abilities at the touch of a button, and the offensive gameplay is very dynamic and such a giggle when every ability is unlocked and at your disposal, and every attribute of your character is enhanced to the point where you are stronger, faster, more agile, and more stealthy, and much more powerful than any entity in the game. However, the lack of realism is where the gameplay of the series suffers badly in attaining a higher regard. So, for instance, you can consume an old granny, start running up buildings, jumping 30 feet in the air, and pretty much no one gives a shit. You can consume a guy in a base in front of tons of soldiers, evade the alert that sounds when you're discovered doing something non-human, return in the guy's skin and no one bats a eye. Even the least intrepid person would notice that, and it seems to break immersion when the game tries to give you the option to perform games in a stealthy way. There's even an achievement in both games for not harming a single civilian throughout the game, which is damn near impossible. And little things like the tacked-on gunplay, which feels so robotic and easy that it sucks, and the fact that you can't climb ledges and roleplay more is disappointing when considering Crackdown showed that this is technically possible in the same console and generation. But the point of this game and the series is not realism. It is to wreak as much havoc, carnage and mayhem as you can during your allotted playtime, and trust me when I say 50% of your time will be devoted to completing the game, the other 50% will be just role-playing as an unstoppable monster in every superhero film ever, with the added bonus that there is no spandex-clad muscled-up stereotype to stop you. Civilians, soldiers, infected zombies, monsters and behemoths will be no match for you. And you'll find out very quickly that the game's primary motivation is to make you feel invincible. And to that end, the game succeeded.
But in terms of dynamic experiences, the gameplay does become repetitive and somewhat easy, which means that there's no sense of challenge in later parts of the game. Overall, the gameplay serves as a solid base for a great arcade-style game, with the controls feeling responsive and sharp as being easy to pick up and play even for beginners. But it does not do much to give the player substance after maybe 3 or 4 hours of gameplay once you've unlocked the lion's share of abilities, which I feel harms what it set out to do, which is to provide a diverse gameplay and narrative which is both compelling and interesting if you don't fancy smashing through buildings every 5 seconds.
Well, with the gameplay out of the way, let's take a look at the next thing that's probably going to be just as obvious as the overwhelming powers that you have: the presentation that the game has to offer.
Each game follows a semi-realistic style with some elements of comic book action and violence to help desensitize the player against the torrent of gore that they're exposed to. However, the visuals are basic, and the only really well animated aspect of both games is the character models of Mercer and Hella themselves, with many of the buildings, landscapes, NPCs and vehicles looking identical or just straight up bland. This could have been forgiven if it weren't for the fact that the level of detail looks like it's elongated and added verticality to Vice City and gave Tommy Vercetti a facelift and some sweet new powers. It just feels like, despite the world being populated, it feels empty and desolate somehow. And while I may be exaggerating the lack of detail given the second game made some steps forward in this regard, it still does not compare to titles such as Skyrim, which are way more detailed and populated and yet released a full year prior to the second game's release. The music feels disjointed, with it having an epic and dark feel, again in keeping with the series like Heroes did, when, to be frank, a more rock or hip hop oriented soundtrack that highlighted the badassery of the character and their actions would have been much better and more suited to the game, given it isn't about gravitas. It's about fun. However, the sound effects and menus are serviceable, with both feeling up to par given their need to convey a sense of scale and importance to the player. The cutscenes are again very erratic and inconsistent, with some cutscenes utilising in-game graphics, others pre-rendered but nowhere near the standard in the trailers. This again leads to a very jarring feel, as it makes the game feel cheap and uncoordinated. Now, this may be a slight nitpick, and again, in the second game they attempt to rectify this by using a unilateral black and white stylized cutscene style. But again, these cutscenes are, well, boring. They seldom have any plot progression that's actually meaningful, and they don't really convey their points all that well or make Hella look like a badass. Overall, the game does a decent enough job of presenting itself, but I think they both have missteps that give them a feel of them being either underdeveloped or poorly executed, which cannot be denied. Leaves, again, somewhat of a poor taste in your mouth.
Wow, so it's not going well. Well, with presentation and gameplay out of the way, let's take a look at the one avenue that the game has left to redeem itself, to try and give itself some credibility. So let's take a look at what kind of lore and story that the series has to offer that's unique, gripping, and intriguing.
The game world bases itself in reality, with the premise pretty much identical to Resident Evil, with the difference that the series focuses less on horror and more on the action and intrigue aspects of what amounts to a zombie apocalypse after an outbreak of a virus developed by a corporation that has ties to the government. However, the plot from there devolves into every revenge story ever. Stop me if you've heard this before. Both games equate to: man wakes up and does not know where he or what he is, finds an accomplice from a previous life, goes after perceived enemy of the game, finds out that there's a bigger, badder baddie that uses them, goes after them, baddie turns into a worse version, he beats baddie to cleanse the city of the virus, and nearly kills himself in the process. The difference is that in the first game, you can buy the premise and you can go along for the ride given the intrigue that the game presents to you. But the second game suffers from the Home Alone syndrome, in that you find yourself rolling your eyes more and more than gasping in awe at the twist, mainly because you've seen it all before. And the twist, and yes, this is a spoiler, that Alex Mercer is now bad, and instead of wanting to get even, wants to destroy the world, as opposed to the first game where he was a goodie and just wanted to get even, it's nonsensical. In fact, I have two issues with this. Number one, why would Alex Mercer not want to do that from the get-go in the first game, which in turn would have made him the modern day equivalent of Kratos, which, to be honest, would have been f***ing sweet. And number two, why would you not keep the character consistent in the game itself, given he turns Hella into one of his evolved, asks him for help when all he really wanted to do was kidnap his daughter to become the host for the new virus to take over the world, and then he betrays Hella after Alex learns he's becoming too powerful? Why? The simple solution is to make them both baddies, or put them in scenarios where in the game it's not possible to kill civilians and still somehow be the hero, because in both games you murder and massacre people incessantly and without distinction between enemies and bystanders, which by definition makes them baddies. It's confusing, poorly thought out, and while again the game may not be, this might not be the purpose of the game, a lazy or poor narrative can wreck an experience no matter how well defined and presented it is. Cough! Mass Effect 2, cough! And as a result, the story, and it just feels juxtaposed to the gameplay, given that you're supposed to be either an anti-hero and not kill anybody, or have collateral damage, or you are a baddie. Just fully embrace it and make the story about that. And for that, it's very difficult to forgive the game in terms of its storytelling perspective.
So, to sum up, the game has average gameplay, if we're really honest with ourselves. It has a very poor story in both instances and a lackluster presentation style, but critically and commercially it's still popular, all things considered. Now, this is probably a personal preference, and the reason for this? Well, because you ignore the story. You boot up the game fully powered and you have 30 minutes to kill. It's absolutely hilarious to play because it's just, like I say, it's every game with power fantasy rolled up into one game. And I suspect I'm being overly critical because, well, all things considered, I was on board the hype train for both games when the CGI trailers came out and the live action trailers came out, painting this game as one of the best games of all time, and it just always felt like it pretended to be something that it wasn't. And again, I can't really deny the fun there is to be had in these games if you ignore their flaws. So, in both instances, I'll award the game a 6 out of 10 for both the first and second games. The reason being they're average games that do set themselves apart because no other game really lets you do on this level and without cheating what you can do in this game. And as a result, if you're not into games that don't have a strong narrative, or more importantly have just a lack of real substance to them, I'd say avoid them. But weirdly enough, I am recommending them for your collection if you've never played them before and you need something to sort of kill half an hour, 45 minutes at a time and just bulldoze through things without really a sense of challenge. It's one of those, it's kind of like FIFA, you just play it, despite its flaws and despite its lack of real innovation, you still enjoy it for what it is. For people that are looking for an experience as an unstoppable harbinger of doom, this is absolutely perfect. And in terms of if I'm going to make a recommendation of one over another, I'd recommend one for maybe the edge on story and intrigue, and the second one in terms of detail, refinement of gameplay, and for slightly more to do in the world. And that was my review of the Prototype series. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Halcyon Ray's Review. Please like or dislike, share and subscribe. I've also been harping on the last couple of episodes about supporting other YouTube channels. I'll keep this one to a minimum this occasion, just say, look in the link, people. There are people there that deserve your support and would greatly appreciate any likes or subscribes you wish to throw their way. So, in the meantime, thank you very much for watching again. Please like, share and subscribe. Please like, share and subscribe. Especially share. Share it. Share it now. Click that share button. Stop listening to me and click the goddamn share button for the life of God. Please take care of yourselves as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take care.